Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lecture 1, which is focusing on women and work, paid and unpaid labor. So, this week we're focusing on work and particularly around the gendered experiences around work, both work within outside as well as in the domestic sphere. Before we go into this, though, I do want to talk a little bit about class and a couple of sort of issues around wealth and distribution. I think class is something that is a little bit hard to talk about, but I don't also want to assume that everybody coming into this course knows what I'm talking about in regards to class. So, what is class? Class is a tricky subject in regards to the United States because we have kind of blurred ideas around what is, like, for example, lower class versus middle class versus upper class. But essentially, when we talk about it in sociological terms or economic terms, what class encompasses is what we would call a socio-economic, in regards that people having the same social, economic, cultural, political, or educational status. And there's a wide discrepancy in that, but we're kind of lumping people with same sort of economic and social backgrounds. And that's where you then get these sort of kind of blurry divides between what is middle class, working class, and upper class. It's really important, though, that class, like gender, is socially constructed, meaning that, yes, the amount of money you have does then elevate you in regards to the ability to afford such things like luxury items or live in certain areas of the neighborhood that are better or worse and so forth. But even the sort of values that we put onto class, like what do we think is high class versus low class, that is very much socially constructed. Another term I want to introduce you now is the term meritocracy. The best way to sort of explain meritocracy is this term that I was told a lot, and probably some of you have as well, which is the idea that wherever you come from, meaning whatever socioeconomic class that you're born in. So, like, let's say that you were born working class, or born in poverty, or newly arrived here as an immigrant who might be poor or whatever. That through hard work alone, hard work and determination, you can achieve anything. That this idea, which is called pull yourself up by the bootstraps, meaning that hard work and determination can make it so that you can achieve anything. You can become president of the United States. You can become CEO of a major company. You can become an astronaut, a pilot, whatever you want to do. But do we live actually in a meritocracy? That is the bigger question. Because while I believe very much that people work hard and work hard for the things they love and for their goals, and again, this is not about knocking people who work hard. The truth of the matter is that in many ways, despite the amount of working hard that you can do, there are many sort of social, economic, and political divides and barriers that make it so that you that the road to your successes or your goals is either much harder or impossible to do. It gets into discussions that we had previously around intersectionality. It's about the fact that it's not to say that people don't work hard, even if you were born with certain privileges, that you don't work hard for what you have in life, but the obstacles you had to do, the barriers, the sort of issues that you've had to face will probably be much less. You've had to go through far fewer doors than other people who have other disadvantages. And that's really important because when we talk about, particularly when we talk about gender inequality in the workplace, we need to talk about how, particularly, sexism and the gender hierarchy works to disenfranchise women, makes it puts many more roadblocks and barriers in their ability to succeed in their work or achieve something that they want to achieve. The other thing that we need to talk about is that while this whole week is focused on work, that we live in a capitalist society. Now, capitalism is a very loaded term, but essentially capitalism is this is it is an economic as well as political and social system where private industry in which individuals own the means of production. Now, what is means of production? It refers to anything like money, labor, factories, equipment that create the goods that are bought and sold. So, capitalism versus other sorts of systems of government and economic systems is that private individuals or individuals composed or companies composed of private individuals like shareholders, stakeholders, etc., own the means of production, meaning that they own the oil drilling or they own the car factories or they own the private industrial agricultural lands and not the state. Whereas in some other forms of government, the state does own these things, where they own large plots of land so that they can farm and then they distribute that food out to their citizens, or they own certain sort of companies to produce goods that then they then get the profits and they then redistribute it to the citizens. In a capitalist society, it is that the individuals own it and will therefore be incentivized to maintain the maximum amount of profit. This is where the market based economy happens because the market based economy depends on capitalism, in which wealth is distributed to private individuals buying and selling. So it's not, again, that the state is owning one means of production, like let's say, for example, a farm, and then they distribute the crops that are grown to the people and so forth. Instead, it's individuals who own that farm, or a large, or an agriculture, or a group of shareholders who own that farm, and then they then are incentivized to sell to private individuals for the maximum amount of profit. So, a defining feature of capitalism is competition, that you must be competitive, whether that's your company or if you are a seller yourself, whatever that is, because the more competition you have and the better that you can sort of make the maximum amount of profits, the more you win in this system. But what this does is that within a capitalist society, and we don't have a strictly 100% pure capitalist society, we have a kind of a mixture where there are socialized elements as well, and so it's not that it's this pure capitalist system, but it's pretty capitalist dominated, which leads to then when you have individuals competing for one another number for a limited of resources, it leads to a greater unequal wealth distribution. The United States is one of the highest income disparities in the world, where about 1% own the majority of the wealth, and then about 9% own the second, and then the rest, the remaining 90, owe it. So there is a very wide difference between the super super duper wealthy and the very very poor. And that there's very little middle ground. We actually have a very small middle class because of this. So, when we talk about feminist class struggles, what we're talking at the heart of it is around gender inequality. So, and a core question in regards to feminist class struggles is about is is it about fighting for equality in an unequal system? If the system is set up to be already unequal, capitalism is about competition, therefore, there's inequality in that. And if we want to sort of create an equal world where everybody can enjoy that, should capitalism be the model that we use? That's sort of a question that, particularly in feminist circles, they are still debating. There's also the discussion around that previously, particularly in the second wave, where there was this push to get women out to work, as you saw in the documentary, that those discussions around the right to work, that women should, like, you shouldn't stay at home, you should be out in the job force, really sort of was echoing the voices of very privileged women. Because for the most part, for working class women, women of color, indigenous women, they had already been working outside the home. They've always been working outside the home. So a big criticism around the second wave has been around that it's been very much dominated by a certain group of women, a very privileged white women who wanted the same rights as privileged white men. And while advancement, meaning more women going into the workforce, did help, wage inequality and work discrimination still existed for the majority of women, particularly women of color, low income women, and so forth. Queer and trans women, disabled women, immigrant and migrant women, indigenous women, and as well as mothers and caretakers. So, we live in an unequal world, and I would like you to, as you're doing these readings and as you're listening and watching the film, is to think about your own experiences in regards to work. Was your take home pay equal to your other coworkers, particularly if you identify as female? Was it the same as your male coworkers? And if you identify as male, is it the same as your female, and so forth? Were you treated equally, not only by your coworkers, but by upper administration, as well as by patrons, so customers, and so forth? Another question to think about is around the gender displacement of your workforce. Is it a place that you work where the majority of upper level, so beyond manager but upper people, are mostly comprised of one gender versus the other? And then, very importantly, does anyone in your family experience pay or wage inequality because of their gender? Although there are many regulations within the workplace, and a lot of that has to do particularly with feminist activism around this, around workplace discrimination, there's still a lot of discrimination. Women are facing discrimination in their income, unemployment, and occupational distribution, meaning where women are most often placed in regards to different work fields, work hierarchies, and so forth. Women's salaries today average only about 72 to 89 or to 88% to men's salaries. And the ratio of women's median annual earnings to men's only rose from 6.7 in 1960 to 79.80 in 2018. This gets into talking about something that you've hopefully heard about in the news or very much familiar with your own personal experiences, which is the gender pay, or also known as the gender wage gap. Now, the gender pay wage gap is the gap between what men and women are paid. So, what this is, because there's a lot of misinformation about it, is essentially when you look at median annual pay of all women who work full time. So, we're looking at just statistics on salaries, right? And how much on average people are being paid. Compared, and when you look at just look at salaries, and then you sort of just divide it up between men and women, so you're only looking at those two factors, you see that women are being statistically paid less than men. And here's the thing, is that these are in positions where, or jobs, salaries where the person who's in that job has the same qualifications, skills, level, training, so forth as the another person. The only thing that divides them or makes it different is their gender. Yet, when we then look at gender and difference there, we see that women are being paid on average less than men. Now, technically, women are expected to reach pay equity with men in 2059, but because of current rollbacks in regards to workplace discrimination and pay discrimination, most likely it will be 100 years, so 2106. So here's the thing, whether or not you feel that you've experienced the gender wage gap, or if you've witnessed it in others, or maybe you think, well, it's not going to be a big deal for me. Think about the long-term consequences. So even if you are somebody who does get paid less, and not because of anything in regards to your rank, to the education or skills you bring in, to any other factor in regards, but just strictly because your gender, you're being paid less, it has real consequences in your lifelong term. So even if it's just 9 cents difference, those 9 cents add up. 13% of women, American women today, are 18 to 64, who are living below the poverty level, in comparison to 9% of men. A large part of that, why is it that women, on average, there's a higher number of women living in poverty, the federal recognized poverty level, than men? A lot of that has to do to the gender wage gap, where women are being paid less, therefore they take in less earnings, and this adds up to the point where there are just more poorer women than there are men. For ages 65 and older, 11% of women and 8% of men were living in poverty. Again, a big part of that is the gender pay and wage gap. The pay gap follows women throughout their lifetime in the workforce, even after they leave the workforce, because as we know, Social Security, which is dependent upon what your salary, it's particularly the last 5 years of your salary. If women are being paid less for the same job, same position, same skills, qualifications than their male counterparts, that means that their Social Security is less. Today, 42% of mothers with children under the age of 18 are their family's primary or sole breadwinner. So women are oftentimes the ones who are taking care of children, yet they are being paid less. So what that means then, you're literally taking money out of a child's mouth, right? So other benefits such as disability and life insurance are also smaller for women because these benefits are usually based on earnings. And while as families increasingly rely on women's wages to make ends meet, the gender pay gap directly affects more men and children as well. So I know that discussions around the gender pay gap have complicated this, and people have said, well, it's not as much as you think it is, and so forth. The truth is that if there is a pay discrepancy, meaning that people are being paid differently, and it doesn't matter if it's 1 cent or 2 cents, or 10 cents, or 20 or 50 cents, which for many women, particularly women of color, it's much worse, the gender pay gap. What this means is that essentially you are being valued less, meaning that women are being valued less. And then not only being valued less for their labor, but then it affects their male partners, their children, their family members, because they are then getting less earnings, therefore, to support themselves, their family, and loved ones. It has a ripple effect. So, a couple of things to keep in mind around the gender pay and wage gap. Across all injuries, women are paid lower salaries than men. So it's not about like, well, women are taking lower paying jobs. That is true that women are oftentimes forced to take lower paying jobs, but mostly it's because of childcare, as well as other sort of service care oriented needs, and therefore then they have to take a more flexible, usually lower paying job in order to meet those needs. Among the occupations with the most people working full time year round, women are paid less than men. And then when you're looking at sales, like so women who are working in sales, women are paid just 63 cents for every dollar paid to men. In production, just 72 cents. And in management, 80 cents. And in office and administrative support, 87 cents to men. Women with master's degrees working full time year round are paid on average 72 cents for the dollar paid to men with master's degrees. Further, among full time year round workers, women with doctoral degrees are paid less than men with master's degrees. And women with master's degrees are paid less than men with bachelor's degrees. Which, for any of you, regardless if you identify as male or female, should be upset because you are all paying for your education equally, right? You are. There's no difference in tuition. Yet, because of the gender pay gap, a woman's education is technically valued less, simply because it is a woman who's getting educated. Now, while statistical analysis shows that about 62% of the gender wage gap can be attributed to occupational and industry differences, differences in experiences in education, and factors such as race, region, and unionization, that still leaves about 38% of the gap unaccounted for, leading many researchers to conclude that yes, the gender wage gap does exist, and factors in such as discrimination and unconscious bias continue to affect women's wages. So, again, we can add a lot of things about why there's pay discrepancy, but still, there leaves a huge part about it that is just about discrimination on itself. Of course, it's really important to be intersectional in this discussion because while I've been quoting some numbers, oftentimes it's usually the number representing mostly white middle class women, around 81%, 88%. And we forget the fact that particularly women of color, black, Hispanic, Asian, and so forth, are being paid much less. So, again, women of all major racial and ethnic groups earn less than men of the same group and also earn less than white men. Hispanic workers have lower medium income worker earnings than white, black, and male Asian workers. Hispanic women's median earnings are on average $603 per week, or about only 62.2% of white male median weekly income earnings, as well as around 88 or so percent of median working earnings of Hispanic men, because Hispanic men also have low earnings. They're being paid less than white men, but then Hispanic women are being paid less than white men, as well as being paid less than other Hispanic men. What this means is that we all have life setbacks. A car gets broken, you get sick and go to the hospital, you need to take care of a loved one. Many things can impact us, and when you are paid less for doing the exact same job, that means that there is also less money or less security or less cushion for you when something occurs, because life is always going to throw you a curveball. So that means then when a life throws you a curveball, it can be the difference of like, oh man, I have to pay this like fee, and yeah, it sucks, but I'll be okay, to, oh man, I need to pay this fee and I'm going to be kicked out of my house because I can't afford it. Like, that is the difference. That is the difference between, what could be an inconvenience or even a small setback to devastation. And that's what also leads into, for so many women, being in situations where they are in from earning, decent wage or decent sort of living to then being in poverty because they have less of a cushion, because simply that they are being paid less. And if I have to emphasize this again, especially as an educator, if you're not upset by the gender wage gap, be upset by this. Whether you identify as male or female or anyone across the gender spectrum, you are all paying for an education right now. You're paying for this class. You deserve then that this class be valued the same as other classes and or other education, regardless if you're male or female. Your education, the work that you put into it, the income, the effort, and all of that is equal. So why not it be valued equal? And only we can do that by addressing the gender pay gap, so that when somebody enters the field with the same education, background, skills, and experiences, they should be paid accordingly equal, regardless of their gender. So, of course, as I said before, there's a lot of reasons for the gender pay discrimination. Good old fashioned sexism, as I said, that 38%. So, compensation differences appear to be tied to perceptions, availability, and fields gender specialized into. Yes, women are more represented in clerical services and occupations, while men are concentrated in craft labor jobs. But also, men with children appear to get earnings boosts, whereas women lose earnings, particularly when it comes to childcare. Whether that's pregnancy and parental leave, where we do not have a federal system around maternity leave nor paternity leave, which are both equally important, as well as childcare, nursing, and a lot of the work that we still do, particularly work outside of the home and inside of the home, is scheduled around the division of labor between genders. So, and what I mean by this is that today, in the modern work world, yes, women and men are working at greater numbers than before, right? And in fact, are working longer hours than I've ever worked before. Yet, work on general is still based on a very divided structure where, yes, it would have been not okay, but at least doable for one partner to work 60 hours plus a week and be able to house and feed and clean and clothe themselves, because usually it was dependent upon that person, usually male bodied, had somebody in the home taking care of everything to make sure that their partner could go to work. We, of course, don't live in that model, and most of us never had lived in that model where we have either both partners working or parents working and so forth. But yet, we still have very gender divisions around labor, where particularly the domestic sphere is still seen as the domain of women, even in the context of women working outside of the home. So there's a lot of sort of discussions around the fact that women have to work two jobs or two shifts. They have the shift outside where they work at their a public job, and then they do the second shift or the shift at home, which can create an impossible situation where they have to do it all. And that's a big burden. There are other things to think about when we think about the gendered way work is constructed, because even when we think about the workplace model and even like what qualifies for sick days, so there are a lot of there have been numerous times where women have been fired from their jobs, not because of in regards to anything that they did, like any negligence of their job, but because they've had to either take a sick day or not, a lot of times because of things that they can't control, whether that is very strong menstrual cycles that can leave some women feeling incredibly um, not able to go to work because they are sick and so forth, to pregnancy, to other sort of concerns. You cannot usually take a sick day for this. A lot of times employers have a limited amount of sick days, and if you lose one, you're fired. So, but if we're thinking about creating equality, why not talk about having it accessible to everyone so that women have the option that if they're having, for example, bad menstruation, a child is sick, they are sick because of pregnancy or things that are out of their control, that they are able to take that day off, still be a productive member at wherever they're working, and still be able to have their job. The gender division or the gendered sort of way we look at work also affects in regards to men, in the sense that we don't have paternity leave, meaning that most males cannot request time off to be with their new baby. And what that means then is that we are denying fathers the opportunity to be with their kids and to bond with their kids. There's these classic stereotypes out there that women are just more suited or better at taking care of babies than men. But the truth is that nobody is naturally more suited to take care of a baby. The only way that you learn how to take care of a baby is to spend time with a baby. And because most workplaces, if they offer any sort of parental leave, it's going to be maternity, means that women, rightfully so, again, not against maternity leave, women have more opportunities to bond with their babies and learn things like, oh, well, that is a cry meaning that the baby's hungry, or that is a cry meaning that the baby needs to burp, or that is a cry of like, we need to take the baby to the hospital. And that is only learned through time spent with that baby, that young child. Men, because of the workplace model that we have, that's very much still based on this idea that the worker is male and has a usually female partner at home taking care of the house, means that men are denied this ability to take care of their kids and learn these sort of skills that would make them not only better fathers, but involved in the ways that they want to be involved. So, if anything, if we're thinking about work in the way that it's divided, yes, of course, in many ways, women get the short end of the stick. Not only can they get fired for things that they shouldn't be fired for in regards to their own physical health and other sort of needs, but also the demand that they have to work outside of the home and inside of the home. But that also we're denying, it also gives a shorthand of the stick to men in regards to parental leave, as well as other sort of factors in regards to taking care of their home. So it's an unequal system for everyone. And that gets into sort of discussions around how workplace inequality and the gender divide in regards to work has impacted particularly women. There's a great article out there called The Mommy Tax. We're not reading it for this class, but we usually read it in my other classes. The mommy tax is considered to be the highest tax on families. Now, it's not an official tax. You're never going to file this every year, but essentially what it is that it's a tax particularly on women who decide to have children. And what that means is that a couple with a total income of 81,000 and two equally capable partners could lose around almost as much as over $1 million in lifetime income if they have a child. And the reason it has to do a lot with the wage gap, particularly between mothers and childless women under the age of 35, is now greater than it has been between young men and women, meaning that mothers, women who are caretaking children, are being paid less or losing income greater than not only men who have children, but also women who are not taking care of children. Oftentimes it's also has to do and a lot of it has to do with the fact that women have to make these sort of sacrifices in their job in order to take care of children. And because of maternity leave in the US, it's not fully compensated, so and the length varies depending upon the state. So women lose income in many ways. They can lose income in regards they have to leave their job, or they have to lose income in regards they have to take less hours, or not go for a career advancement, all these sort of things. Yet men who have children, men daddies, oftentimes have what is called the daddy bonus, where companies and places will give additional income to fathers based on sort of strongly held cultural views that fathers with children need more money to support their family. So the mommy tax is this, and it sort of argues that, and it's not about judging people who have children, but it's basically speaking about how we need to support mothers because, truthfully, when you look at it, one of the worst career moves a woman can make is to have children. And that should not be the case, meaning that women who have children, it should not impact their career at all. It should be that they're able to make decisions about their lives and go if they want to keep their career or not, whatever that is. But having children shouldn't impact women the way that it does now. Because the truth is that there's incredible amounts of discrimination against women who have children. Mothers are often less likely to be hired for jobs because they're less likely to be perceived as competent at workplaces and are oftentimes paid less than their male colleagues with the same qualifications. There's incredible amounts of discrimination against mothers. 71% of mothers with children at home work yet, so according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and women who are the sole or primary breadwinner are about 40%. Yet, they are being discriminated from all multiple fronts, where they're being paid less, hired less, or seen as less competent. And a lot of this has to do with the sort of cultural bias against mothers. Meanwhile, for men, having a child can be good for their careers. They are more likely to be hired than childless men and tend to be paid more. In fact, just recently, there was a study in Cornell where researchers sent fake resumes to hundreds of employers. They were identical, except on some there was a line about being a member of the Parent Teacher Association, suggesting that the applicant was a parent. Mothers were half as likely to be called back, while fathers were called back slightly more often than the men whose resumes did not mention parenthood. So, and then in a similar study done at the same sort of Cornell Institute, they asked participants how much they would pay job applicants if they were employers. Mothers were offered on average 11 grand less than childless women and about 13 grand less than fathers. So, this is not about judging whether you have a child, whether you want to stay in your career after you have a child. These are all important choices that women can make freely. But when we look at the way that the workplace is discriminated against mothers, this is something that needs to change. And two policies have been proven to shrink the mommy tax: publicly funded high quality childcare for babies and children, and moderate length paid parental leave, both maternal and paternal. If anything, if we want to talk about solutions in regards to also conquering the gender wage gap, one step in the right direction is paid maternity leave, as well as paternity leave. In the United States, we don't have a policy, even though countries that I'm surprised do have them. So it's food for thought. All right, see you on to the next lecture.